It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and Joe Dolan.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast. We are, of course, presented by DraftKings Sportsbook. Love what they do for the show. Love those of you that get the discounts and offers they have when you use the code Ross over on the DraftKings Sportsbook. I am Ross Tucker. You can check me out on social media. Love those of you that do, at Ross Tucker NFL. It's either football, beer, or food for the most part. You can check us out at Ross Tucker Pod. So whatever social media platform you're on, we're on. Please give us that follow at Ross Tucker NFL, at Ross Tucker Pod. Love those of you that check out the show and or just the highlight clips on YouTube, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. Fun show on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast with Thomas Dimitroff today, the former Falcons GM. And speaking of the Falcons, yes, we are going to get into the first-round pick quarterbacks on today's Fantasy Feast. What are we doing now over the next 4 weeks, right? Well, now that we know where these guys have gone in each position, at least 4 weeks, by the way, because there might be more receivers or running backs we need to talk about. But now that we know where these guys have been drafted, we're going to talk about them. We're going to talk about their fantasy prospects and also what it means for the other veteran skill guys on those teams. And by we, I primarily mean he. I'm talking about Joe Dolan, at FG_Dolan. Google top-ranked fantasy analyst, best fantasy analyst over the last 10 years. It's Joe. And because of that, he's one of the co-owners of fantasypoints.com. Encourage you to get a subscription over there. It is well, if you listen to the show, you like fantasy football, so you should have a subscription to fantasypoints.com using the code 24feast. Honestly, really, you don't even need to be a fantasy. Like, they've got betting, they've got numbers, fantasy points, proprietary data. That's worth the subscription right there. Fantasypoints.com, code 24feast. Joe, I feel like on some level, we're finally kind of getting a chance now to unwrap our presents a little bit that we had been anticipating for months. Christmas is now behind us. The NFL draft is behind us. We know where these guys are. We'll start with Caleb Williams. Talk to me about where you think he should get drafted or will get drafted as a rookie, we presume, week one starter. Then we'll get into some of the other guys they got around him.
Yeah, I think the second best quarterback on the team is Tyson Bagent. So probably going to be the starter week one is Caleb Williams. And right now, on some best ball platforms, ADP, roughly QB 11, QB 12. So he is being drafted as a starting fantasy quarterback. Obviously, we know he has mobility, but he also has a great supporting cast, something that even I, and look, Ross, we've buried Justin Fields on this show, but there's no doubt that Caleb Williams is better set up for success than Justin Fields ever was in Chicago. Since 2000, a total of 84 rookie quarterbacks have started in at least 6 games. Out of that group, only 15 have scored more than 17 fantasy points per game in their rookie season alone. 17 fantasy points per game, that's enough to be considered kind of a starter. Deshaun Watson, Cam Newton, Justin Herbert, Robert Griffin III, and C.J. Stroud are the 5 best from a fantasy football perspective. But Williams has one of the best landing spots there is. He's mobile. He's got great receivers. Obviously, also Rome Odunze to go with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. I have zero issue drafting Caleb Williams as a high upside, low end quarterback one. I mean, I would have to say I'd be surprised if Caleb Williams was a top 5 quarterback because it doesn't happen very often for rookies, but there is an opportunity here for him to do it with his mobility and his phenomenal supporting cast.
All right, Joe, how much do you think he's really going to run would be my question.
let's say, I don't think he's going to run like Lamar Jackson, but can he run more than Justin Herbert? And if he runs more than Justin Herbert, then you're probably going to have a solid enough value on the ground, get him 5 touchdowns, and I think that's just going to supplement his work. He is mobile. He's more, I think he extends plays with the idea of throwing the football. That's why you got the Patrick Mahomes comparison to him. Obviously, you don't want to compare somebody to Patrick Mahomes, but stylistically, that's what Caleb Williams did. If he runs the ball 70 to 75 times, I think that's going to be enough to supplement his passing. And passing is obviously where Caleb Williams is going to make his hay as a fantasy quarterback.
All right. While we're talking Bears and Caleb Williams, what does his selection mean in your mind for DJ Moore, for Keenan Allen, for Rome Odunze? I mean, we'll talk more about Rome Odunze when we get to the receivers, the rookie receivers, but I guess I'm just curious. DJ Moore in particular, but Keenan Allen's in a new situation. You know, I guess if Caleb's getting drafted that high, it's not considered a negative for those guys. It's a positive.
Yeah, I have a hard time taking Keenan Allen where he's coming off the board. Keenan Allen is coming off the board in like the 4th round in early best ball contests. DJ Moore, however, is more of a 3rd round pick. I am into DJ Moore at that price. Obviously, DJ Moore caught 96 passes last year. And look, he did that with a quarterback who can't throw. There is more target competition right now, but I am into DJ Moore. I think DJ Moore can produce with Caleb Williams. Keenan Allen vis-a-vis Rome Odunze, that's where I'm struggling right now, and it's going to take me a couple weeks of drafts to really suss out how I feel about those two guys for fantasy. But it's going right now kind of Moore in the 3rd round, Allen in the 4th, 5th, Odunze in the 5th, 6th. That shows you that people are very high on Caleb Williams.
Really curious to get your thoughts on the number 2 overall pick, Jayden Daniels, because, I mean, I don't want to say it feels like RG3 all over again, Joe, but it feels like the potential is there for a really big rookie season from Jayden Daniels. They have weapons around him. They've improved the offensive line, and the guy's absolutely electric as a runner. I think he's going to give the Commanders more as a runner than Caleb Williams will give the Bears.
Oh, for sure. It's not even close.
So I'm curious where he's getting drafted right now and where you see him.
So if you want to look at the downside of Jayden Daniels, just the downside of him, look at what Justin Fields did for the Bears last year. And Justin Fields was a top 12 quarterback, and Justin Fields could threaten to be a top 5 quarterback each and every week, and the guy struggled to throw the football. Well, Jayden Daniels ran for 1,100 yards last year at LSU. And remember that college football quarterback rushing yards include sacks. So Jayden Daniels, who actually got sacked quite a bit, and that's the biggest red flag against him, Jayden Daniels still ran for over 1,000 yards despite the fact that he had a high sack to pressure ratio. So Jayden Daniels is going to run the football, and he has theoretically decent receivers in Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. So I think Jayden Daniels has an opportunity to, even if he struggles as a passer, to produce big time numbers as a fantasy quarterback. And his current ADP right now is around quarterback 17, quarterback 18. I am telling you, I will be drafting a ton of Jayden Daniels at that price because we know he gives you the cheat code aspect. Jayden Daniels in Washington, this is going to be the case anywhere, but I like him better in Washington than I would have in New England because his supporting cast is simply better in Washington than it is in New England. Jayden Daniels has elite fantasy football upside, and his downside is mitigated by the fact that he is a monster runner. You would have to think, I mean, barring Jayden Daniels getting benched, there is really, the downside here is far overshadowed by the upside. I love him at quarterback 17. That's a great price.
I'm a little bit surprised by that, Joe. What are people seeing that you and I aren't? Why is he going so much lower than Caleb Williams?
I mean, because of the number of good quarterbacks there are for fantasy. I mean, look at these guys ahead of him. Brock Purdy is these are the guys between Caleb Williams and Jayden Daniels. Brock Purdy, quarterback 12. Obviously, he put up great numbers last year. Tua, who had great numbers. Jared Goff, Trevor Lawrence, and Justin Herbert. So, like, Justin Herbert's quarterback 16 right now. Now, I think you can make an easy argument for Jayden Daniels over all of those guys, which is why I like Jayden Daniels at quarterback 17. But this influx of talent at the position is really making it appealing to wait on quarterback a little bit this year in fantasy football.
How do we feel about Jayden Daniels throwing the ball to McLaurin, Dotson? How do we feel about it from those guys' perspective?
I mean, those guys, see, Terry McLaurin's a great receiver who's never really been great for fantasy, and probably because he's never really had great quarterback play. That being said, I think Jayden Daniels can provide some upside. He can threaten down the field, and that's good news for Terry McLaurin, who's had 4 straight 1,000-yard receiving seasons, but no more than 5 touchdowns in any of those seasons, which is why his real-life production has outweighed his fantasy production.
I was on the radio, I think it was last week, Joe, in D.C., and they were asking me about Jahan Dotson and whether or not I thought he would have a bounce-back year or what the deal was there.
Yeah, he had a really rough year, and I think quarterback play didn't help. I think the offensive scheme didn't help. They obviously, I don't want to say they broke Sam Howell and, like, ruined his career, but, I mean, Sam Howell's dropping back 50, 60 times a game. That just can't happen. I think the new offensive scheme, I think Jayden Daniels down the field, and I think a reset is going to be good for Jahan Dotson. I'm not, like, seriously into Jahan Dotson. Like, I'm not like, oh my God, he's going to have a bounce back season. But Ross, his ADP right now, wide receiver 63. I don't know, for a guy with talent and draft pedigree, that's a decent bet to make, in my opinion.
Always a decent bet, Joe, to drink Labatt Blue Lights while you're watching whatever it is, NBA playoffs or NHL playoffs or whatever, or just hanging out with friends, living life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. The next one is interesting, Joe. Let's talk Drake Maye. Going to the Patriots, 3rd overall. My guy Dan Orlovsky is begging the Patriots to not put him out there and to let him sit for a while. Where is Drake Maye going? Can you even draft this guy for fantasy?
Superflex and rookie drafts, of course. From my perspective, not so much. Quarterback 23 right now. He's going ahead of Will Levis. He's going ahead of another rookie quarterback in J.J. McCarthy, who I would take over him. And I think the reason is he has underrated upside as a runner, Ross. He ran for over 1,100 yards and 16 rushing touchdowns across 26 starts at North Carolina. By the way, trailed only Jayden Daniels among quarterbacks in gains of 10 or more yards on the ground. So he has underrated upside as a runner. But the problem here is you're 100% right. The supporting cast is not very good. The Patriots took 2 receivers that, obviously they hope. By the way, Jalen Polk and Javon Baker, very different players. So they offer a little bit of a stylistic kind of contrast there, which was, in my opinion, something good. But I think the chance that Drake Maye sits for a while. They have one of the best backup quarterbacks in the NFL in Jacoby Brissett. So I think the chance that Drake Maye sits for a while really puts a cap on his fantasy upside. I think J.J. McCarthy is going to start right away. That's just my opinion. Drake Maye, I think the Patriots have a luxury for him to sit for a little bit. You said Dan Orlovsky thinks he needs some developmental runway. I don't disagree with that, which is why I think quarterback 23 in best ball redraft is a little bit rich for me. But in Dynasty, especially if you're in Superflex, that rushing upside is very real, and that makes Drake Maye a very appealing Dynasty player. I like him a little bit more in Dynasty formats than I do in redraft formats right now. I just told you Caleb Williams and Jayden Daniels, I like those guys in redraft and in Dynasty. Drake Maye, he is more of the Dynasty pick to me. Well, obviously there are more here in the first round who have more Dynasty value than they do redraft value, but Drake Maye is the first one off the board, and also his rushing upside is greater than some of the other guys in this class.
Is there a positive for the other skill guys for the Patriots that it doesn't look like Maye will start, so they're going to get some good balls from Jacoby Brissett?
I don't want to say looks like he won't start because we haven't even gotten to mini camps yet, and I got to reach out to my boy Andrew Callahan, who covers the Patriots for the Boston Herald, and get the scoop because he's the one who tipped me off to Ramondre Stevenson's breakout 2 years ago. I'll get the scoop from him when mini camps start. If Drake May's blowing the doors off everybody, he might start week 1. But right now, this is a Patriot supporting cast, which I mean to me the best thing I can say about it is that they're all cheap. So if you love Drake Maye, you love him, and you're just like, oh my God, he's going to be like CJ Stroud. He's going to have an amazing rookie year that nobody saw coming. You can get all of these Patriots receivers, Demario Douglas, Pop Douglas, Kendrick Bourne, Jalen Polk, Javon. You can get them all for basically free in drafts. And remember, if you invested heavily in the Texans offense last year, which I didn't, because I did not see CJ Stroud's rookie year coming, you won a lot of leagues because that was a very cheap offense to invest in. The Patriots are going to be the same way this year.
Interesting. Let's get to the shocker of the first round. The Atlanta Falcons taking Michael Penix Jr., number 8 overall. Now, obviously, we're not expecting him to play at all. We're expecting Kirk Cousins to play. Does this do anything for you from a fantasy perspective? Does it make you tepid at all on Cousins and what the Falcons think? What any relevance whatsoever?
Look, I'm sure, Ross, you've discussed this at extent on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast and College Draft Podcast.
Yes, and I wrote about it for the 33rd team this week too.
Yeah, so
thanks for reading it, Joe.
I appreciate that, Ross. I thought it was great. The Falcons, I don't like. The whole thing here is, unless your opinion is drafting a quarterback is never bad, then I don't get their process. But let's not. The only thing this does for me is, the best case scenario for the Falcons is Michael Penix doesn't play for 2 years. I guess from a fantasy football perspective,
I would actually say maybe 3.
Yeah,
because he has 10. Kirk Cousins has $10 million guaranteed that third year. I don't know that that's great to have to pay Kirk Cousins $10 million to not play that year. I mean, that's not ideal. That's just so crazy. Their best case scenario is that they'd have to figure out Penix's option before Cousins before Penix ever plays a snap.
From a fantasy perspective, look, they decided to sign Kirk Cousins after they knew they loved Michael Penix, okay? Because they did all of their draft. I mean, Ross, that's what scouts do, right? You sign Kirk Cousins in March. The Senior Bowl's passed. The Combine's passed.
Well, that's, by the way, that I don't want to get too far down, but that's why it's asinine.
Yeah,
because they're not getting any of the value out of having a quarterback on a rookie contract.
So anyway, if from a fantasy football perspective, Kirk Cousins is like quarterback 18. He's going right after Jayden Daniels. That's a fine price to pay for a quarterback who has historically put up really good numbers. And by the way, he's got a good supporting cast. You don't sign Kirk Cousins to a $100 million contract if you don't think you can compete. There's no reason to do that if you don't think you can compete. The only thing I can say here is if Arthur Blank, the story that's out there, he was sick and tired of watching Desmond Ridder and H.B. Heineke out there, okay? He was sick and tired of having bad quarterbacks and juggling bad quarterbacks. The best thing I can say here for guys like Drake London and Kyle Pitts and Darnell Mooney is if Kirk Cousins were to get hurt and that Achilles repair doesn't go well, they have a high upside backup in Michael Penix. And that gives you maybe a little bit more cushion if you're drafting a Drake London and a Kyle Pitts, who, by the way, don't have to deal with Arthur Smith anymore either. So that is probably my biggest fantasy takeaway from this. Kirk Cousins is quarterback 18, okay? That's not going to push me off of Kirk Cousins, a guy who has 30 touchdown upside. As a matter of fact, Kirk Cousins' 30 touchdowns might be his floor given his last few years in Minnesota. So that's not going to push me off of Cousins. Michael Penix, from a dynasty perspective, if you're in Superflex, back end of first round, early second round, somebody's got to win the league this year, man. And if you're rebuilding, then I'm into Penix. But also, he's older. So he might not play until he's 27. So it is a confusing pick, in my opinion. Yes, to be kind.
To be kind. We got two more to get to, which would appear to have a lot of fantasy relevance. I think they're going to play. Let's start with J.J. McCarthy with the Minnesota Vikings. By the way, how about the report, and I talked about this on today's Ross Tucker football podcast, Joe. The Vikings tried very hard, 3 first-round picks, to get the number 3 overall to take Drake Maye.
Mm-hmm. That shows you how high they are on Maye. Yeah.
They more or less settled for J.J. McCarthy at 10. I don't know if that matters or if that has any impact on your thoughts on McCarthy in Minnesota.
I can only evaluate the player and the situation. J.J. McCarthy's ADP right now is quarterback 27. I will be drafting a metric ton of J.J. McCarthy at that price because his situation is phenomenal, Ross. Justin Jefferson might be the best receiver in football. Obviously, Jordan Addison had a great year as a rookie last year. T.J. Hawkinson's coming off an injury, but T.J. Hawkinson, in theory, could be ready by the middle of the season to produce. You've got 2 good tackles. They just picked up the 5th-year option on Christian Darrisaw, who's one of the most underrated offensive linemen in the league. Kevin O'Connell is a quarterback whisperer. Obviously, look at some of the numbers that Nick Mullins put up down the stretch. I mean, Mullins, if you were watching him last year on the Christmas week game, he threw for like 400 yards, and every throw was like an adventure. You're like, no, what are you doing? And he's putting up numbers. So J.J. McCarthy, with his skill set, and by the way, he's an underrated athlete, so there's some upside as a runner here for J.J. McCarthy as well, more so than maybe Kirk Cousins would have given you last year, certainly more than Kirk Cousins. There's an opportunity here for J.J. McCarthy to have a really strong rookie year with a great supporting cast. I think he's got some rushing upside to go with the fact that he's throwing to 2 really good young receivers and potentially TJ Hawkinson in the middle of the season. I love J.J. McCarthy at quarterback 27. I think that's a great value. I wouldn't be surprised if he becomes a stream-worthy starting quarterback for fantasy football. And I don't even think he needs to play great to do that, as we saw from Nick Mullins at the end of last year.
How do you feel about it for Jefferson, Addison, Hawkinson?
Well, again, Nick Mullins putting up numbers. Josh Dobbs coming in there, putting up numbers briefly. I think it's fine for those guys. I don't think it's as good as Kirk Cousins. If Kirk Cousins was back with the Vikings, Justin Jefferson would be in the mix to be the first overall pick for fantasy. In my first draft of the year, I actually got him at 1-8. And look, he's still a first-round pick, but for Justin Jefferson's pedigree, that's a pretty good value.
Last but not least, Joe, Bo Nix to Denver, as we all talked about for weeks leading up to it.
Yeah, so Bo Nix, Denver's got a lot of holes in terms of supporting cast. I still don't think this is a great roster, but if you wanted Bo Nix to land in a spot where the coaching was the best, this is it. Obviously, we talked about how Bo Nix, his college production with Brett, fraudulent a little bit. A lot of screens, a lot of quick hitters. Well, who throws to the backs more than Sean Payton? Nobody does. So just Cortland Sutton isn't enough, but the Broncos also still have Marvin Mims. They drafted Troy Franklin. They drafted Audric Estime, so they're going to run the football. Samaje Perine's still there. I actually think Bo Nix could be a good fit for what Sean Payton wants to do, those quick hitters. Joe Lombardi is the offensive coordinator, old Sideways Joe. Joe Lombardi's throwing the ball horizontally with Matthew Stafford and Justin Herbert. They finally got a quarterback in Bo Nix, who that's what he did in college. He took what the defense gave them. He ran the offense the way the offense was supposed to be run. I am not surprised that Sean Payton liked Bo Nix. 2 years ago, Sean Payton got a combined 3,500 yards and 29 touchdown passes out of Trevor Siemian, Jameis Winston, Taysom Hill, and Ian Book. Okay? So there is some underrated upside for an underrated athlete in Bo Nix. I'm not really into him for fantasy just because I think this team stinks, but Bo Nix, I think he landed in a perfect spot in terms of coaching.
We landed in a perfect spot having you as the co-host of the Fantasy Feast. Check him out on social at FG_Dolan. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. We'll figure out next week whether we do running backs or wide receivers, but what an awesome recap of the quarterbacks and their fantasy value. I'm stuffed. We're done.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.